Alrighty, so good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Preissig. I am the CSGA Vice President of Internal Operations, and I'm here today to talk to you guys a little bit about the basics of financial aid in clinicals. Now, this is not meant to be a expert level session. I'm not an expert in finance. This is not meant to be an advanced session. This is meant to be a brief session about some of the key things that we in CSGA feel that all students should be aware of and should know. So this is our agenda for today. We're just going to go ahead and talk about some of these things in some detail, just so we feel that you know what's going on in clinical land. So the first thing I want to talk about is the academic calendar, because I believe some details of the academic calendar aren't discussed with the students as much as they should be. The first thing I want you guys to know is that students in clinicals advance from one semester to the next in 15-week increments. So once you've completed 15 weeks, 30 weeks, 45 weeks, and so on, you will be moved forward into the next semester. As we know, the year 3 curriculum consists of two 12-week core clerkships and four 6-week core clerkships for a total of 48 weeks of core clerkships. And for our year 4 curriculum, we typically do one 2-week elective clerkship and 10 4-week elective clerkships. The total of electives is supposed to be 42 weeks before we can graduate with our MD degree. There are some 6-week options, few and far between. Like I know students will do a global public health session and go do healthcare in a different country, but the overwhelming majority of students at Ross will do one 2-week electives and then have to do several months, 10 months of 4-week elective clerkships in order to graduate. If you want to go ahead and see what semester you're in, you can do that by going to My Ross, then Student Services, and then Clinical Department, and then RUS and Clinical Department, and then Clinical Clerkship Scheduled. And it will tell you what semester you're in, how many more weeks you have to go before you advance to the next semester, and so on. The most important details from this slide that I want you to know is the fact that there are 3 semesters within the calendar year at Ross. The spring semester is from January 1st to April 30th. The summer is from May 1st to August 31st, and the fall is from September 1st to December 31st. The thing is, though, even though that's like a standardized thing of having 4 months per semester, each student will have a different semester based on when their clinicals start and end. For example, let's say I am doing a 12-week core clerkship that begins on December 1st. Okay. So 12 weeks means that it's going to go through December, it's going to go through January, and it's going to go through February, right? The next core after that would then be scheduled for March. So even though that 12-week core clerkship spends most of its time occupying months that are in the spring term, January and February, it will be part of the billing for the fall because the clerkship started in December, which is part of the fall. In this example, that student will then have their spring start in March. So that'll be when their unique spring semester would start. Another example I could give you is let's say you have 2 students who are brand new to clinicals, and one student has their first core scheduled for September, and the other student has their first core scheduled for November. From the perspective of the finance department, those 2 students will have different courses in that fall term, and one student's fall will start differently from the other student. And that's important because that's going to affect when you receive your loan disbursement, which we will talk about in a later slide. But I just wanted to have you all take away that the biggest thing here is you can figure out what semester a clerkship is going to be charged in based on its start date. If you have a core that starts on August 30th, that's going to be part of the summer because it was in that summer window. You know what I'm saying? So bear that in mind as you go through the curriculum. This next slide has to do with tuition rates. Everything from this slide is taken directly from the Ross website. Everything that I say has a source somewhere that I'll let you guys know so you can do your own investigation as well. So students who are registered for 8 credits will be considered full-time. An example of that would be, let's say that you started your course in September and you started with one 12-weeker that carries you through September, October, November, and then you have another 12-weeker that starts in December. So for that fall term, you will have 24 credits, the 12 from one 12-weeker and the 12 from the other 12-weeker. If in this example, instead of a 12-week in December, you had a 6-week course starting in December, you would have, 18 credits, the 12 from the one starting in September and the 6 from the one starting in December. So you're going to be full time. That's not a problem. If you are registered for 4 to 7 weeks of electives or of cores or clerkships rather, that puts you at half-time status. Now, the thing to bear in mind there is there are times where we are deferring our loans because we are half-time students. And if you go less than 4 weeks in a semester, that's going to trigger the finance department to inform your student loan server that you're no longer enrolled at least half time and you may need to start repaying your loans. So bear in mind that generally speaking, because of how large the clerkships are in terms of their credits, we're going to be probably full time most of the time, but just be cognizant of when things are scheduled, when you get to electives, when things are going to fall, so you can make sure that you're enrolled at least half time. That last bullet point that you see, tuition will be prorated per clinical at a rate of $1,993.47. And then there's the administrative fee of $250.67. That's how much you're going to be charged. So let's say, for example, your final core, you've already completed the first 5. Your last core of the 6 is a 6-weeker that starts on May 1st. All right. And you have no elective schedule. So from the perspective of the clinical department, you have just that one clerkship in the summer term because it started in May. And so from the finance department perspective, you just have to pay for that one 6-week core. So the math there is going to be 6 times 1,993.47 plus 6 times 250.67 equals the amount you're going to have to be paying the school for tuition for that semester. So that's just a little easy example of how you're going to do the math, just things to be cognizant of as you are progressing through the curriculum. This types of aid slide is comprehensive of a variety of options that do exist. Most of us, a lot of us are going to be using federal loans, and there are multiple types of federal loans, right? One type of federal loan is the direct subsidized loan. I included it here as a contrast to direct unsubsidized loans. And it is a way of paying for things for education. However, we are not eligible for direct subsidized loans because direct subsidized loans are only eligible for undergraduate students. We as professional students in a doctoral program, we are not eligible for direct subsidized loans. But I still wanted to include it to be thorough, just so all the students have the information, and also again to contrast it with the direct unsubsidized loans, right? In direct unsubsidized loans, interest will start accruing from the date of disbursement. So even if we are enrolled at least half time and we have deferred our loan repayment, interest is still going to accrue. That's in contrast to the direct subsidized loan, where the U.S. Department of Education pays for any interest that accrues. So it's frustrating that we aren't eligible for subsidized loans, but it is what it is. The other type of loan that we are eligible for is called the Graduate Plus loan. Just like the direct unsubsidized loan, the interest will start accruing from the date of disbursement. However, the difference is Graduate Plus loans require a credit check. So every 6 months, before more loan disbursement can take place, there has to be a credit check of the loanee, of the person receiving the loan, to ensure that they're still eligible. And now I asked the financial aid office about this, and I asked them if there's a way for students to identify on our end using our websites, My Ross and Med Community, if there's a way for us to double check when Graduate Plus loans need redoing. And they said the best thing for students to do is to call the financial aid office. They believe that, the financial aid office is here to help students, and they would rather you call in advance to clarify any details of your account balance prior to going ahead and leaving it be, and then you don't get your money, and then there's a problem, and then there's issues, there's stress. So definitely feel free to call the financial aid office whenever you believe you need any type of clarification. That is what they're here for, and I've talked to them many times in the last 3 weeks. They're going to be very helpful. I do see a question in the chat. Let me take a second to answer that. In that last example, if you pick up an elective, would you be? That's a good question in the chat. For the sake of the recording, it was a question of if you have a core that's scheduled in, let's say, May, and you have nothing else scheduled, but then you add an elective later. It's one of those things where you're going from the third year to the fourth year. The answer is you will not get a second loan disbursement. Based on what I was told by the financial aid office, loan disbursements are only based on the 3 semesters, fall, spring, and summer. And if you change your schedule after the fact, there will not be a second loan disbursement. What I was told was if you have a positive balance, and I'll explain that more later. If you have a positive balance, you can just use that money from the disbursement to pay for that elective later. Other aspects of this scenario I'll go into later. I don't want to get out of order and confuse anyone, but the simple answer is no, there won't be a second loan disbursement if you add an elective later in a semester. So back to the types of aid thing, but thank you for the question in the chat. I appreciate it. Back to the types of aid, we also know that there are scholarships available in which you don't have to repay that back. That's just, you've earned that money because you've submitted an application, or you've done something to win that type of award. I don't really have any about that. There are scholarships available that you could be eligible for, that you could look up and whatever else, but that's more the business of the student. I don't really have any comments based on that at this time. And furthermore, there's also paying out of pocket. That's not the case for most overwhelming majority of people go to medical school, but I introduced it here simply to be thorough because it is a type of paying for your education. So there you go. This slide is probably the most important slide that I want to focus on the most and make sure you guys take a second to really understand, because people have questions about loan disbursements all the time. Now, in this scenario, we're going to go ahead and assume that you've done your FAFSA form in the summer for the academic year. So in this example, you have submitted it in the beginning of the summer of 2025, and it's all set for the 2025 to 2026 academic year. And you've also done your master promissory notes. Your master promissory notes basically says that you agree to take responsibility of the loan and you agree to pay it back. And it's part of the requirement for having your loan be disbursed. A comment on the master promissory note, the MPN, if you will, is sometimes those need to be renewed. It was not made clear to me how often they need to be renewed, other than it's based on the schedule of the student. So it could be every 1 semester, or it could be every 2 semester. Just like what I told you with the Graduate Plus loan, the best thing to do is to call the financial aid office and clarify if you need to sign or submit a master promissory note again on the studentaid.gov site. Now, the biggest thing is there's a 10-day window period prior to the start of a semester for when loan disbursements take place. So now what does that mean? So we're going to go back to that example I gave earlier of the student who has a 12-week core that starts in the beginning of December. It goes through December, through January, and through February, and then their next core would start in March. Okay. So for all intents and purposes, that student's spring semester would start in March. Let's say, to make it easy, it starts on March 1st. That means, assuming that the student has done everything on their part, the the disbursement will be provided to the student within 10 days of the start date of that clerkship. So in our example, we said March 1st. So there's the 10-day window would start roughly February 20th. And at some point between February 20th and March 1st, the student should expect to see a loan disbursement on the account. The 10-day window has something to do with the fact that they can't obtain and dispense loans any earlier than 10 days from the start of before the start of a semester. That's just some rule that they have to abide by. Now, in terms of the actual calculations, there are two that you guys are going to go by. The first is, if you want to know the amount owed for a semester, you go to My Ross, you go to Student Services, and then on the right-hand side, if you go to this page, you're going to see a bunch of stuff on a column on the left-hand side. But on the right-hand side, you're going to see student account balance. And sometimes it may say 0, sometimes it may say a number, but you're going to click on that. It's a link that you can click, and it takes you to a page called account balance. And from account balance, you're able to ascertain how much would be owed for a semester. If you wanted to find out the timeline for disbursement and the amount dispersed, that can be found on My Ross, then Student Finance, and then Award, and then Award Payment Schedule. You now have two numbers, right? The amount owed and then the amount to be dispersed. So let's say the actual math in this example is not going to fit the tuition rate that I gave you. This is just something to make it easy for you. Let's say, for example, your tuition rate for a semester is $30,000 even. And it's determined that, no, let me rephrase. Let's say it's $20,000. Okay. And your student loan is $30,000. You're dispersed $30,000 for that semester. You would have a positive balance of $10,000. That $10,000 would then be given to you to whatever account is associated, your checking account, so be it. But the money would be going back to you because Ross doesn't need it. Ross only needed 20,000 of that 30. So now that money is yours to do what you feel is academically needed, right? And that's the amount that is used to plan your budget. So putting these examples together, let's say that the student's spring semester started in March and their tuition was $20,000. The $30,000 in this example, based on the tuition, would be expected to be dispersed within 10 days, starting on February 20th. And then whatever the school doesn't use is given back as a positive balance to the student. And then you can do that type of math and type of expectation for every single semester. So, for example, right now it's the end of August. Now, let's say that for whatever reason, you have time off and your next clerkship doesn't start till November. Then if you know how many clerkships you have scheduled in the fall semester, which starts on September 1st, of which this November clerkship that I mentioned as part of my example is part of, you know how much you have to owe. You can then expect that within 10 days of November 1st, you'll have your disbursement. And you can use that to plan out your schedule. That's all I think I have to say about this slide. Here's the thing. There are some options if you run into issues. This slide was added in by our executive treasurer, Olimity, and she's wonderful. And, she came up with a couple things that you guys should be aware of as well. So there is something called the equal disbursement rule, which allows you, I know I'm reading off the slide, but it allows you to borrow money from one semester and move it to another. And this is only allowed if the number of clinical rotation weeks in the semester you plan to borrow from is less, right? So using the example on your screen, if you have 4 weeks of clerkships in the spring, but you have a much greater fall semester and you found out that you don't have enough money, you didn't get a big enough disbursement in the fall and you're kind of running into some issues financially, that's when you call the financial aid office and they're able to rearrange things around. The reason why financial aid is able to rearrange things around for the students, which of course is on a case by case basis. Don't expect them to just, just rearrange money all willy-nilly. It's definitely a matter of, there's some thought plan into it. So definitely, be active participants in your own finances. I urge you that. But the reason why they're allowed to do this is because our school operates on something called BBA, borrower-based academic year, which in simple terms means that we are allowed to receive aid based on when we are actually enrolled in clinicals or in school, as opposed to what is considered the traditional academic year, right? So if you're starting your clinicals in March, let's say, and you just came from Ireland whenever you were withdrawn because you have to be because of comp and because of step one, and you're finally re-enrolled and you're finally starting your course in March. March is not a typical considered routine start time, but because of B-Bay, that allows the school to distribute funds to students in that fashion. So that's how the school is able to do the things it does. It's not really important for us as students. It doesn't really, it's more about what they're doing. However, I wanted to give you that knowledge just so you have an understanding of why the finances at Ross work the way they do and how distribution of money works the way it does. There's also something called the Special Circumstance Request for Food and Housing, which is a request to increase your federal direct graduate plus loan as opposed to a request to increasing the unsubsidized loan. You need a written statement or email, and you also need some additional proof, and that's also something that the financial aid office can help you out with. And then finally, there are payment plans available. The financial aid office wants the students to be successful. They don't want anyone to have any financial hardships, and therefore there are payment plans available. I do see a question in the chat. Let me go ahead and try to answer that. Do you know why it's some? To answer your question, I don't. That's a question that I don't know why in some cases the total amount of aid that was awarded might be different than the total amount of aid that was refunded. That's outside the scope of my knowledge, and I don't want to try to speculate and give you a wrong answer. My question would be I'm sorry, my answer would be if you see a discrepancy like that, call the financial aid office. They can look into your specific account and go ahead and uh, address any concerns you may have. So that's it. Again, this was a lot shorter than expected, but this was the basics. This is some basic stuff that we wanted you all to know. I appreciate you coming. Please, use the phone number for the financial aid office. It's right there. Please use the Connect calendar to keep track of all future events. If there's any other questions in the chat, I can stick around and try to answer them. But I appreciate you all coming. I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some basic information that, as a student, is going to help you out as you go through the curriculum at Ross. I'll stop sharing and I'll stop recording.